All right, so let's start first with what is capitalism, which is essentially asking the question of what sort of society do we live in right now, and what are the problems with it? We kind of all inherently have a feeling of what's wrong, right? Um, and especially when it comes to your basic life necessities, right? We're 3 years into a pandemic, and we don't guarantee healthcare to everybody. There's a lot of problems in the capitalist society. Uh, and of course, that grows into much bigger things, which you should check out the recording from a couple months back, where we used this live stream to go really more in depth about capitalism. But as just kind of a starting point to think about what is capitalism, we have to kind of get beyond the very basic idea that I think we're all kind of taught, at least indirectly, if not maybe directly, through schools, through movies, culture and things like that. That capitalism is this economic system, right? That like you make a decision that like you have an economic system with capitalism, and it gets associated with some concept of being free, right? If you're capitalist and you have markets, then you're free. Because that was all the Red Scare propaganda against communism, that you had to have markets and capitalism. And it gets really stuck in this economic debate, but really capitalism has morphed. It has evolved over time to be much more than just an economic system. It's also extends into basically all the spheres of our public life. All the aspects of our society and culture right now, including our political process, are all dominated by this very capitalist point of view. So we have to keep that in mind as we think about stuff, that capitalism is not just an economic system. It's a whole social system. It's a whole cultural system that we're trying to analyze and understand and be able to counter. And it's gonna take more than just changing how our economy works. It's going to take changing how our culture works, where our cultural expectations are of how society should work. So keeping that in mind, we could think about, well, how do we define capitalism? We can kind of understand it's this big system that touches everything, but like we want something a little bit more concrete than that, right? Like how exactly does capitalism influence people's thoughts? Like what sort of way does it make people think of? And there's basically 4 points that are brought up by Peter Staudenmayer in his essay, What is Capitalism? And this is one way to look at it. It's not the only way to look at it, but I think it's a good one. That identifies 4 unique characteristics of capitalism, so that when you're in this capitalist mindset and the way that you think about society and culture, these are kind of underneath that whole thought process. So the first one is commoditization, which is turning everything into commodities. And basically making sure that everything is something that can be packaged up and sold, at a store, at the mall, on the market, as a whole general principle. And that we exchange these things on markets. We exchange these commodities to make a profit. That's kind of an underlying assumption of capitalism. I know, I'm upset about it too. So we see the commoditization of not only the economy, but our culture itself, where like our culture, our entertainment, our books, movies, TV shows and all take on this very capitalist idea, where instead of them being, for fun and for thinking about stuff, right, and enjoying them with your community, that's not the main reason that movies get made anymore, right? Like they're made to be commodities so that you go purchase them and somebody makes money. That's the main purpose now. It's not to be, artistic and creative. It's to make money, to sell on the market. And so because the market is so important, the second part of capitalism is that there's an outsized role for markets. So everything becomes emphasized on the market. Everything has to become a market. And we see this in capitalism, not only for, you go to stores for even for your basic needs like food and all, but like the capitalists, which is both Republicans and Democrats in our political system, the capitalist answer to healthcare is, well, you make a healthcare market, you have a health insurance market, and you have movies sold as markets, and they compete with each other in movie theaters. And even our cultural relationships and all start to become this kind of market where we think of the people we work with and even our friends and stuff in this very transactional sort of way that like I give you something and you give me something, and everything starts to become this very market centered thought process. Part of the reason that comes up is because capitalism puts this emphasis on ownership, and in particular this concept of having private property, or maybe it's better to call it private investment property, because some people get kind of confused about what's wrong with having property, what's wrong with having a toothbrush. I'm not talking about your toothbrush, talking about investments. That people capitalism assumes that certain people get to own a thing and keep all the profits from it, even if somebody else did the work or whatever, that there's an owner for that thing and they get to keep all the profits and they maintain the control over that thing and over the profits. And that's a very deep assumption of the capitalist system, that things should work that way, but they don't necessarily have to. And as we're going to see when we talk about some of the more indigenous efforts and things like that, this idea of private property is not a thing that has existed very long in human history. But it's like key to how capitalism works. If you don't have private property, a lot of the rest of capitalism falls apart. So private property has to not only exist, but it has to be enforced. So you have police and military and stuff that like protect that private property and the so-called right to ownership of it. And then lastly is exploited labor, that to drive all this stuff, the people on top that make the profits, they have to exploit labor. The people that are actually doing the work to make things happen or to create the commodities or whatever, if they were the ones that kept the profits from their work, then the capitalists wouldn't make any money. They have to take that money from the workers. So they exploit the workers. The workers don't get as much as they should, right? Or as much as would actually be fair, because then capitalists wouldn't make money. So you're always going to see exploited labor in one way or another within a capitalist society. You're not going to see labor treated fairly and democratically. And because of the private property thing, capitalists are going to make decisions about what the labor needs to do instead of the workers themselves. And all of this adds up together into what Murray Bookchin identified as the grow or die imperative. That in order for capitalist businesses to keep up with each other in the market and all based on these properties and rules here, they get stuck in a mindset where they have to constantly grow. They constantly have to have new markets to sell things. They have to have new resources to exploit, whether that's people or, some kind of physical resource, whether it's fossil fuels or whatever. But you have to always grow and expand, or otherwise you're done and the market's going to force you out. So all of this stuff together creates what we see in capitalism today, which ends up in a lot of exploitation and poverty.